The views expressed and the opinions given by the individual host and their guests do not necessarily reflect those of ParaX, its affiliates, or its sponsors.
It's coming.
All these voices. All these voices. All these things you can't explain. All these painful memories. They keep haunting you and daunting me. It's just a ghost of you and me. It's just a smoke and gasoline. It's just a ghost of you and me. Of you and me. All these whispers.
My name is James Hershey.
In the rain.
Right back.
All these shadows in my mind. With my reflection I can't find. It's just a ghost of you and me. It's just a smoke and gasoline. It's just a
I know how to
ghost
do it.
of you and me. Of you and me. Don't let 'em take you away. Don't let 'em bring you down inside. It's just the mirrors in your mind. Don't let 'em bring you down.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of Staring into the Abyss. I am your host, horror author James Hershey Jr., and with me, as always, my co-host, Old Boy James Ash. How you doing, brother?
I'm doing pretty good. How's everybody doing? I hope everybody is having a good night, Misfits.
On tonight's episode, we're going to be talking about a very, very cool and interesting legend from London, and that is the legend of Spring-Heeled Jack. Now, Spring-Heeled Jack was the terror of Victorian London. He was known as being a prankster, and he definitely had a taste for violence. He was like a demonic Batman. It was said that he would knock on women's doors, and when they would answer, he would tear at their clothing with his metal claws and just slice them up like a Freddy Krueger guy. Most of these stories of Spring-Heeled Jack have female victims. That kind of made it especially frightening at the time when it was happening, because women were a lot less able to defend themselves back then than they are now. Nowadays, women can own firearms, and they can take martial arts and they can protect themselves. Back then, they were a lot more open to attack. They weren't as versed in defending themselves, as versed in firearms, as versed in fighting skills in order to really fight off an attacker. One of the reasons that the Spring-Heeled Jack legends still go on to this day is because there are actually a lot of reports at the time, different eyewitness stories and news reports from the era that confirmed that these things were actually happening. Okay, these aren't just some vague urban legends that you hear about around a campfire. These things actually happened, and a lot of people think that Spring-Heeled Jack was a real person, and that he was terrorizing women all over London during this time period. Other people think that it was some sort of supernatural demon or supernatural creature that was preying on women at that time. But I tend to think that Spring-Heeled Jack was an evil Batman, basically, of the time, that he used technology to aid him in terrorizing and mauling these women. One of the cool things about Spring-Heeled Jack that makes me call him like a demonic Batman is that he could jump extremely high. That's where he got the name Spring-Heeled Jack, because he would be able to jump from the ground up to the roof of a house or over top of the hedges and stuff to get away. From a lot of the early sightings in 1855, that's where we get the information that he had this amazing ability to jump over roofs and over hedges and stuff like that to either find his victims or to escape when he was being chased. Now, nobody quite knows how he did this, but I think he probably had some kind of special prosthetic kind of shoes or braces that he put on his feet that contained some sort of springs or some kind of mechanism that helped launch him. I don't think that he could naturally jump like that. I think that there was some kind of technology that he developed. Maybe he was some kind of mad scientist or mad inventor who came up with some gadget that would help him to jump like that. Now, some people think that he was supernatural in origin, and that's why he had the ability to jump further and higher than an average person would. Some people also think that it's an exaggeration of the witnesses, but when you have every witness saying basically the same thing, that this guy could jump an amazing distance or an amazing height, I don't think that could just be an exaggeration by the witnesses. Because when you have so many of these reports of him doing this, that it literally became his name, Spring-Heeled Jack, I think that tells you that was actually going on. Another thing about him was that he had iron claws. Okay, now these weren't like sharp claws like a creature would have. This was like a Freddy Krueger glove, basically, but on both hands, where he had knives on his fingers. Now, he would use these iron claws to rake at the clothing, the hair, the face of his victims, and most of the time, he didn't kill them. Most of the time, he would just rip up their clothes and rip up their face a little bit, or a little bit of their skin, cut them up, and then take off. So they were left alive, but they were left scarred for life, emotionally and physically. Some people think that because he cuts up the clothing with his iron claws, that his attacks were sexual in nature. But I tend to believe that it wasn't so much a sexual thing as it was the prankster side of him a little bit with ripping of the clothes, and a little bit of a sadistic side too, because not only are you cutting the person and hurting them with these claws, but by cutting a woman's clothing so that her body parts are exposed, is a nice way to say it, you're also doing emotional damage and adding some shame and embarrassment to the situation as well. So I think that was a lot of the motive rather than a sexual motive. Now, a lot of these reports of Spring-Heeled Jack also include glowing red eyes. Now, this tends to lean towards the supernatural explanation, but it doesn't really fit with the rest of his appearance, which is strange, because Spring-Heeled Jack is described as looking like a rich Victorian gentleman, but his victims say that his eyes glowed red, which made him look demonic, and it definitely lent credence to the idea that he has some kind of supernatural origin. Some reports also say that he has pointed ears and a pointed nose, which also lends you to believe that it's some sort of supernatural creature. He was basically he became a boogeyman to children all throughout London during this time period. They were afraid of him. The thing that I don't understand about the whole red eyes thing, first of all, you have the red eyes claim in almost every supernatural creature. Every time you have a creature, anywhere from the Mothman to demons to Spring-Heeled Jack to you name it, there's going to be reports of them having red eyes. So I don't know if that is something that is necessarily the case, because if this is a supernatural creature with glowing red eyes, why would he have to have iron claws? Why wouldn't he have flesh and blood claws? Biological claws, organic claws. Why would he have to have iron? And the witnesses are very, very specific. They say that his claws were made of iron. So in most supernatural creatures and most ghosts and stuff like that, iron hurts them. So why would a supernatural creature put iron on his hands to make claws? That just doesn't make any sense to me. So I think that probably the glowing red eyes thing is an exaggeration, or it is just made up, because it's not in every report. It's only some of the witness reports say that he had glowing red eyes. Now, some people claim that Spring-Heeled Jack was just a rumor that was invented to try to stop the peasants from drinking too much. And as the story goes, to prevent the peasants from spending too much time drinking and committing a bunch of sins, the preachers spread the rumors that a ghastly demonic figure was running around the roofs of the pubs. And according to this theory, the story spread around very quickly. And you know how that goes. It's that old game of telephone where you tell a story and then somebody else that you told it to tells it to somebody else, and it gets embellished a little bit gets added to it. That's the theory here, is that that's what happened. The problem with that theory is that you have a whole lot of eyewitness reports and you have a lot of news stories from the time period that tell you that this was actually happening. Okay, the police got involved. This was not a situation where it was a ghost tale told at bedtime or around a campfire. This is a situation where you had actual news reports in the paper. The police were involved. They were looking for Spring Heel Jack. He was a public menace and somebody that people actually feared. So the idea that it was just a rumor invented by the priests, I don't buy that at all. One of the earliest stories say that Spring Heel Jack grabbed a woman named Mary Stevens, and he kissed her while he was ripping at her clothing with his iron claws. Now, there were some male victims as well, but the male victims seem almost to be incidental. They just kind of got in the way. They weren't really targeted. They were just kind of there when something was going on, and they just kind of got a little bit on the way out, so to speak. They got in Spring Heel Jack's way. He struck out at them as he was fleeing. There are no actual reports of him knocking on the door and attacking men. It's always in the process of escaping that he's attacking the men. Now, one of the theories is that Spring Heel Jack was a very wealthy local man. In this theory, he is basically just an evil rich guy. He's a guy that has a lot of money and can pay for some cool gadgets, kind of like Batman, but he's evil instead of good. One of the people that is most often thought to be Spring Heel Jack is a guy named Henry de la Poer, Beresford. He was the third Marquis of Waterford. In 1837, there was a young woman named Polly Adams, and she claimed that she was attacked by a figure with pop eyes. That's what she said. And now, a lot of other witness reports of the attacks say the same thing, that Spring Heel Jack had pop eyes. And this description fit Beresford. He had eyes that seemed to pop out of his head. They were very large and bulbous. He was also notorious because he loved to play pranks. He was known for that. He was also known for drunken debauchery and brawling. The only problem with this theory, it seems to fit wonderfully, but the problem is that the Spring Heel Jack attacks continued after his death. So to fit this into this theory, these people claim that, okay, this guy, Beresford, was Spring Heel Jack, but it wasn't just him, it was a group of multiple people, and that's how it continued after the guy died. Another one of the thing that comes from some of the witness reports that's kind of out there and makes you think that Spring Heel Jack might be supernatural is that supposedly he had the ability to breathe fire. This report came from several eyewitnesses like Jane Alsop, who said that a man lured her out of the house by claiming that he'd caught Jack. When she went out into the street, the man breathed fire into her face and attacked her with his iron claws. It was this story, along with a couple other witness reports that were kind of similar, that shifted the perception of Spring Heel Jack from being just a prankster to a sort of demonic entity which was attacking women. What I wonder is, if this is the case and he could actually breathe fire on you, I wonder how supernatural that was, or maybe it was just a circus trick. Because we have fire breathers now. You know, that'll take a shot of liquor and blow on a flame and shoot fire. Maybe it was something along those lines as well. Maybe he had a mouthful of something or took a drink and then blew fire on her. Who knows? I wasn't there, so I can't tell you. It could be that this is some sort of supernatural creature, but once again, the technology aspect of it kind of throws that for me. Now, in the majority of the cases, he cut the clothes, he cut the face, and he ran away. But he is also blamed for multiple deaths. Now, some of these stories have been proven to be false, but some of them are still believed to have been true. In some of them, the people were simply frightened to death. They had heart attacks and they died, and that's how he killed them. He didn't actually cut them up to death. They just had heart attacks and died because they were so scared. There was actually one case that found him guilty of murder in a court because he scared the person to death. So to me, it seems like he wasn't trying to kill them because he didn't cut them up to death. He just scared them to death. So to me, that seems more accidental. Not saying that Spring Heel Jack is a good guy, because obviously he's not, but I don't think that he was intending to murder the women. I think he was just intending to teach them a lesson. Now, I called him a demonic Batman. The reason I did that is not only because of his ability to jump real high and all that kind of stuff, but also because he became kind of a legend, and that people started writing stories about him in the little the penny novels, and he was kind of transformed from this demonic entity and this terrible thing into like an anti-hero, into a superhero, really, even. And a lot of people believe that Spring Heel Jack is the actual inspiration for Batman. To me, that is very, very cool and very, very interesting. Now, Spring Heel Jack was a wealthy man. He had access to inventive technology, such as the spring gadgets on his feet that enabled him to jump high, and the iron claws on his hands so that he could cut people up with them and cut clothing and stuff like that. And Spring Heel Jack is also often portrayed with bat-like wings, and he liked to terrorize and scare his victims. And Batman relies a lot on intimidation and fear to conquer his enemies as well. Now, the interesting thing about this also to me is that the Spring Heel Jack sightings did not only happen in the 1800s. They've also continued all the way into the 21st century. Witnesses in the 1930s claimed that they saw a man who could jump super high and spit flames. And as recently as the 1970s, over 10 people saw an enormous pointy-eared figure hop across an entire football field. There's no real explanation for the sightings. You have all the normal theories, such as, aliens and all that. Some people say that the pointed ears are a helmet, and the fire breath is some sort of weapon that he uses. And I don't know what the truth is about that. I don't know if Spring Heel Jack was a supernatural entity and is still around, or if it was a person that was doing this with technology. That's what I believe it is. And what we have now is either the ghost of Spring Heel Jack that is making appearances, or somebody who really digs the legend and is out there doing it too. A copycat, so to speak. Either one, honestly, is possible. I would more likely think that it is either a ghost of the original Spring Heel Jack, or it's a copycat that's out there doing it. Because I just don't believe that Spring Heel Jack is a supernatural entity or supernatural creature in any way, because he's using machinery to terrorize his victims. How many supernatural creatures do you know that use machinery? It just doesn't happen in folklore or legend. Supernatural creatures have their own supernatural abilities. That's what makes them supernatural. They don't need to have iron claws. They don't need to have springs on their feet. They can naturally jump high or naturally have claws or whatever. So I believe that Spring Heel Jack was a sick dude who lived back in the 1800s, who liked to terrorize women, and I believe that the sightings nowadays are either a copycat or a ghost of Spring Heel Jack, the original one, or they're simply made up by somebody who enjoys this legend and it decides they want to have sightings now too. Because there's not a ton of them in recent times, and there's a large gap in between the original sightings and sightings that are beginning to happen in the 30s and beginning to happen in the 70s. So it's not something you're seeing all the time. So I'm going to throw over to Old Boy now and get his opinion on Spring Heel Jack. Get his opinion also on Spring Heel Jack being the origin of Batman, because I know Old Boy's really into comics and superheroes and stuff like I am, and I thought that he would find that very interesting and get his take on it.
And thank you, brother. That was a very interesting story because I just started finding out about the Spring Heel Jack. This is actually started in I think it was 1808, that there was a tall man with a demon-like face that had claw-like nails that could jump extremely high. He could actually levitate. He could blow out blue flame out of his mouth, and there's been reports out of his chest that he could leap and jump very high. And then it just went cold for a while to the 1830s till he was talking about it, how he would attack mostly women, but he did attack men. Later down, when James was talking about, there's actually something else I have found out about this. But in the mid-1830s, late 30s, mid-30s, this whatever it was would attack people. He looked like a demon with red eyes. He also, some people said he looked like a skeleton face, or a bat. He would attack people, scratch them, and he scared people. And there's some people thought it was that guy he was talking about that was just playing pranks and stuff like that. The only problem I have with this started in 1808. This was 40 years later. And it started all the way, it stopped for a while, for a year, and then in 1838, it started up again, where a guy, he attacked that lady Jane and scared her almost to death, but she had to get therapy over this because he was a scary-looking guy. If you guys seen what this person's supposed to be, he either has a mask on or something, but he's a very ugly-looking, pointy nose. He looks like a demon, basically the devil. If you would know what the devil looks like, you know how the picks work and stuff. He has that looking face and blows fire, and he can jump. The problem I have with it is the guy can jump 10, 15, even levitate in some stories. I don't care how good I can understand maybe there was copycats. They caught people copycatting them. So I do believe that happened. There was people who were dressing up trying to scare people, and it happened all the way to all the time, then. And I think what happened, it stopped for a while. Then it started back up in the 1870s, again in London, where a guy, he attacked a woman and took off, and he scratched her with his claws. And then in the 1800s, he left to go to America and Kentucky, of all places, in 1890 to 1900. And then it went away. But in 1930s, in Cape Cod, there was this thing called the Black Flash, but he was similar to Spring Heel Jack. And this thing did the same thing. It looked like a demon. It attacked children, though, also, and it attacked humans. And here's the weird thing about this. This thing had the same thing. Blue fire out of his mouth. He flew. He levitated. He jumped 15, 20 feet. He attacked a man and caught it in midair and broke his hand. He attacked another man and hit him so hard he flew in the air, the man said. The cops chased him in there. I think it was like 6-7 years later, they were chasing him and actually shot at him, and he jumped over a 10-foot wall, clearing it, and just took off, flying through the air. This thing wasn't just a human being, because this thing was seen all the way from then over almost 130 years. So it wasn't somebody copycatting, because the thing was in the United States. Even to 1973 in Canada, a family came upon a tall man that looked like a demon that blew blue fire out of his mouth, and he had pointy, long metal claws in Canada all the way to the 80s. So this thing was almost 170-something years old. It's not just a human being. Yes, I believe some of this was made up because people like the copycat a lot. Yes, I believe that. But do I believe it was a human all the time? No. What I believe it was either a ghost, or it's maybe some kind of creature, or maybe some kind of entity. It seems like that. Like that's a whole other thing I'm going to get into in a minute. But maybe at first this guy copied the original story and he would like to play pranks and they just thought that's what he is. But one of the things says it looked like a bat, a man dressed up as a bat, and a couple times actually. So there was 2 or 3 different things this thing showed up as. But when it showed up to Cape Cod and they called it the Black Flash, it has a different name. Well, the guy I was reading research actually found out about this and put them together. They're actually pretty much the same story, other than this thing attacked everybody. He attacked animals, cats, dogs, humans, kids. In the same thing, they shot at him. He jumped in the air. It went. He was so fast. They said this thing was so fast they couldn't catch him. No man can run that fast. I don't care what equipment you have, especially in that day, in the 30s and 40s. There's no way that he could run that fast. I don't know what he was. Maybe he was a ghost. Maybe it was a curse. Maybe it was a demon. Because I'm going to look into this when I was looking, and this could be a demon because the thing got off on hurting people and scaring people. And that makes me think maybe it's some kind of demon, or maybe it's some kind of dark entity we don't even know of, because the thing seems to travel through different states and countries. So this thing's been in Cape Cod, Kentucky, Canada, originally different parts of London. And it wasn't just in regular London, it went all over Europe. Even heard things in Ireland about him. So this isn't just something that was just happening for a couple years. It would go on off in different spurts. It's kind of like the Mothman. Like it would only happen certain times and then it goes away and then something bad would happen. But if nothing really bad happens, he just attacks people in weird ways. He likes to scare people and cut them with his hands. But he never really kills people. But in Cape Cod, he attacks people. But people did swing at him and take shots at him. And he broke some guy's arm and scared people almost half to death, and supposedly killed somebody by scaring him to death, an old man or something. But other than that, he doesn't try to kill people. That's the weird thing about this. He just likes to attack and takes off after a while, and then he jumps over a 10, 15-foot wall, and that's crazy because I never heard of that. I never heard of anybody doing that. I mean, I know there was some guy, they said it was rich, and he was from France, and he could have had the money, but back then, I don't know about that. Not that high. Maybe he got something and made him, jump higher. That could be a possibility. But this thing had, majority of people said it looked like a demon, and that to me means it was supernatural. It wasn't good because it was seen for 175 years, or more. So that means it's not just a regular person. It might have been somebody at first, or somebody pretending to be the original story, and I believe that. But that part, I believe maybe this is a supernatural being that gets off on fear. That's what it sounds like, especially women. He likes to hurt women and then take off and run away. So that's a real weird one right there. And it breathes fire. And then what some say it even breathes blue fire from its chest. That was another couple reports. This is a real interesting story, a really interesting creature or a human being, whatever it was. Kind of like the Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde thing, but it flies in the air and attacks people and then takes off. It also levitates, too. That's something that's kind of weird, too. The Cape Cod thing was levitating, and the original reports in 1800s that he levitated. So that, to me, seems like we have a supernatural being, kind of like, the Headless Horseman, stuff like that. And that could be a possibility. Now, with the Batman thing, where James is talking about, I read an article about this in a comic book article. Did they get this originally from some of the? It came from they got some of the ideas from Batman. When I read it, it is. I think it was the Cape Cod thing, but it's still him. But a person that looked like a bat or a skeleton or a demon, but he was actually ended up being an anti-hero, but he was not bad. So that's the only weird thing about that, but they might have got some of that story, and they probably used it to use Batman, because it sounds like that. But the only problem I have with that is that guy's not good, though. This is a bad version of Batman. But I remember in the original comic books, he wasn't really the best. He wasn't a superhero / kind of was, kind of wasn't. So it could have been. It could have been some stories to that. They're truth that I mean. So I wouldn't put that one down. If it was, it's a pretty good idea, because you look at it, the guy runs around with a bat suit, jumps up in the air, has devices that make him fly. I could see they kind of got that story a little bit from there. I could believe that. I mean, look at the other superheroes. Superman, he flies around. They got Aquaman, the City of Atlantis. So they could have got some of these stories for Batman. I believe that's a possibility because the whole Batman and vigilante thing. Because this thing sounds like it was a prankster, but it did mean pranks. It was crazy, and he jumped and was athletic, but he didn't do anything to save anybody. So I don't know where maybe they got a little bit of the bat part of it for Batman, but anything else I wouldn't say that because this thing was not nice. Whatever it did, it liked to hurt people and like to scare children. It growled at children. The kids said they saw it with red eyes, jumping out of a bush, growling at them, trying to scare them. And innocence, when you scare the innocent, especially women and children, there's a thing about that. Demons get off on that because it gets them some kind of power to hurt the innocent. And the only thing that's weird about this is iron claws, evils are scared of iron. That's not necessarily true with everything. So, I mean, it could be, and it could be not. If it was a demon, I don't know if that would really hurt it. Because people said they thrown sticks through it, it went right through their body, shot at it, went right through the body. It doesn't sound like it was a human being. And it was really fast. I don't care how fast you are. He was like a Flash, like the Flash on TV, And this thing must have been something else. I don't know, maybe an entity, a ghost, a demon, because that's what it sounds like to me. I don't think it was a ghost because you would know. It's not going to fly in the air. It's just going to disappear and do, I think maybe a phantom. That might be the story. Maybe, a phantom kind of like thing. So I don't know exactly what you would call that, but to me, it likes to get off on hurting people. And it scratches women and attacks people, and people shoot at it, and it flies away or jumps over giant walls. That doesn't seem human to me. That's in red eyes and breathing fire. Because some people said it was a guy. He had a candle, like a machine where he could spit fire, and he learned how to do fire breathing, and was doing that. But I was thinking about that. That would be awful hard to do that. Jump over a 10-foot wall while doing that. It wouldn't be impossible, but I mean, really, realistically, in the 1830s, come on. It doesn't sound like that. It sounds like this thing was terrifying people. It got off on terrifying people. Maybe it was a curse because back in the early 1700s, there's a lot of things going around in London. The hellhounds. You had Jack the Ripper, and that's a weird thing about Jack because it sounds like maybe they kind of got that story from. If it isn't true, think about Jack the Ripper and they got that with a Jack. That's kind of sounds like they took that story from that, or somebody took that story and made it different to make it to be the Spring Hill Jack. It's kind of weird. They both have the same name, and I was kind of thinking about that while I was talking right now. Maybe they got the story from Jack the Ripper and turned it into this, but this is a so much different story. They just have the same name, but it is kind of weird they have the same name in almost the same era. My personal opinion on this and what I'm going to say is this is probably real, and it isn't what people think. It isn't somebody running around joking people. I think some people were copycatting, and maybe that guy did, but I think this is a real entity, especially if it's being seen all the way to the 80s, and even something in the 90s I read in Canada, but I can't confirm that. There's nothing been said lately, so I don't know if maybe this thing only comes around every 20 years, or 15, 20 years, because it seems like every 30, 40 years it comes around, and then it goes away. Maybe it only comes around at a certain time, like the Mothman did. Remember, it come around, and only every 5 or 6 years, and then something bad would happen, but this thing would terrorize people and then take off, and you never see it again, and then it'd go to another town or something and do it again 15, 20 years later. And then sometimes they wouldn't see him for years, and then he'd come back again. Especially in London, he'd take off for a year and then come back. It just doesn't make any sense. And he's supposedly really tall, like 7 feet tall, jumping over that big of just jumping over a 10-foot, 12-foot leap, one leap, not even hitting the top of it. They said he flew over it, and he could fly and levitate. That doesn't sound right to me. That doesn't sound human. I can't fly. And I know people can jump high. That is true. There's people who can jump high, but they have to practice that. And for somebody just to leap a 10, 15-foot leap, that's pretty impressive. That's almost impossible, especially breathing blue fire. Because even if you're blowing fire, I mean, how did you turn it to blue? And how would it go through your chest? It just didn't make any sense. This whole thing doesn't make any sense. It sounds like a super villain to me, but it's not. It's like a demon that Like it gets off on hurting people, like a phantom. That's what I think this thing is. I think it might be a phantom. I think that it or some kind of demon, and I think it might exist, and it might be another story too that somebody made up and just to scare people back then from killing each other and robbing each other, from drinking out in London in the 1800s. But the thing is, it was in Cape Cod. It all the way to Canada. I mean, that's the weird thing about this. The creatures were very similar to the Black Flash. It did the same thing. Levitate, had claws, scary red eyes. So, I mean, that's all I can think of on that one. What do you think, James?
Well, I was mainly dealing with the occurrences there with Spring-Heeled Jack, that particular set. But is it your belief that all of those are all connected, that it's all the same creature? Or do you think that you have an actual supernatural creature and the Spring-Heeled Jack was a guy that was copying that legend? What is your opinion on that?
I think the original Spring-Heeled Jack started in 1808. And I think it was really a spirit, because what you listen to it and you listen to the original stories, it sounds like that. And then this guy might have copycatted it, and then other people copycat. They said there was people, he died, and then there was stuff happening after that. So what I think happened is either this guy copied it, or Jack killed him for copying him because he died, or he just died of old age. And Jack got mad and he was copying him, or he was a copycat. He might have been a copycat, or he didn't do anything, because there's no proof he did anything anyway. I think this thing started and came to this. It's all the way to 1970. Yes, I think this is some kind of demon. I think it's all the same thing. I think that somebody tried to copy it, and that's how they got the Batman thing into it. The people saw it back then and made the Batman. Maybe took the story from that and made Batman. Or took some of the story from that. I could see that with a Cape Cod, or they saw this story. Because, I mean, a lot of these superheroes were from stories in the past, back, especially in the 30s and 20s and 40s. Most of the characters were mythological characters, like Thor and Submariner and Aquaman. All them, the Hulk and stuff came later, the mutation and stuff, but majority of them were over legends. I think they got that, maybe. That's my opinion. This creature, and that's what I think this is, him jumping out and scaring people with red eyes, with fire, blue fire, that's weird. I actually want to look up my demons, because this might be a demon. Or it might be something we never even knew of before. Like I said, we were talking this before, this might be another evil we don't even know of. And it can just travel. And it thinking about it is, if it came from London, that's possible. Because there's a lot of things traveling back then. People were migrating to in the United States. So it's possible.
What's interesting to me, and I think you might be onto something here that I didn't even consider. If you look at the crimes of Spring-Heeled Jack, if you look at the actual documentation and the case files from the era, you see that it got progressively worse as time went on. At first, it was playful, and it was, just cut their clothes up a little bit, maybe give them a little nick and run away. And then it reached a point where it got really dark really fast, to where he was scaring people almost to death, and in some cases to death. He was really carving people up. Instead of just giving them a little scratch, he was cutting into them pretty severely and then running away, to where it left them maimed for life. I think you might be onto something, that maybe this guy, Spring-Heeled Jack, started as a prank to copy one of the old legends of this creature from the early 1800s. And maybe that creature came for him. Whether he heard about, that this was going on, or maybe it was like with the legend of Slender Man, where the more you know about Slender Man, the more you talk about Slender Man, it actually draws Slender Man to you. And we see that with Slender Man going all the way back to the 1500s in the folklore, that's the case. So maybe this is connected like that as well, to where by talking about this creature, and especially by pretending to be this creature as a copycat, draws it to you. I'd be interested to know if the different appearances of this creature throughout time, if those crimes got progressively worse as well. If they started out as a copycat situation where somebody was pretending to be the creature, and then the creature comes for them. Because I think you might be onto something there, because in the Spring-Heeled Jack story, not only did the severity of the violence get worse, but the appearance of the supernatural aspects of it began to appear much more the later you got in that sequence of crimes. In the beginning, he would run and just maybe hop over something, a hedge or something like that to get away. So it was maybe a 5-foot, 10-foot leap. That could be done with some kind of contraption on your feet, some kind of spring shoes or something like that. I know it sounds like, something out of the Acme playbook from cartoons, but it could be done. But then it gets to the point where this thing is jumping up onto rooftops and over buildings and stuff. That is not something you could do as a human being. Now, I kind of chalk that up to the witness accounts being a little bit exaggerated, but if this is an actual creature, if all of these are connected, and it's one creature that's doing this, and I was aware of some of those instances you were talking about, and then some of them I didn't know about. So once you see this overall pattern, maybe it does come from people who pretend to be it, or talk about it, or whatever, like the Slender Man does. And if that's the case, then we should see a pattern there with all of these different occurrences. So what we need to do is research each individual outbreak, so to speak, appearance, and see if it got progressively worse. See if the dial is turned up on the supernatural aspects near the end, where in the beginning it seems more plausible to be a person instead of a creature. To me, that would really tell us something.
I think, yeah, if you look at the patterns, what I was reading, it's got worse. It wasn't just him scaring people. He scratched people, break people's arms, attack people, kill them. And it's just like, it sounds like maybe that's where they got Freddy from, if you think about it, with the claws and stuff like that. It kind of might have took that story, too. You never know. It just seems like this thing, maybe somebody tried to copy it and it got mad. And sometimes you can make reality, a story become reality. And it happens sometimes. And like Slender Man, when you make something come reality, you can't. It's possible. And I think we did. I think they whatever this guy tried to do, he got it mad. Yeah, he might have had springs on him, but I was thinking about it back then. If he had springs, it would be awful heavy. And it might help them out jumping, but you can't get perfect every time with those. You probably run into a wall eventually. So and then they were saying he can levitate. So that's another one that's something people don't usually do. I mean, you see like Chris Angel do it and stuff like that. That's all illusion. What I'm saying is maybe this thing was what it is, and it got mad, and now it went for terror. It was like that was its revenge, going off on people. But it came to the United States and Canada, so that's even weirder. So it wasn't like somebody just made up a story. The police went after him and shot at him, and he jumped over a 15-foot wall. So they, and this was a group of 4 or 5 cops. So it wasn't just people saying eyewitness. It was just a lot of people saying they saw this. They saw it's hundreds and hundreds of sightings, and some of it's always going to be fake or something made up. There's always that percentage, but there was something in this time doing this. I don't know if it was a human. Maybe it was a group of people that like to do this to scare people. Maybe it was a thing they like to do. Maybe it was a cult. But I mean, it came all the way to the United States. It doesn't make any sense, and it just sounds like this was a creature. Maybe it was something that started off where they were copying it, joking around, but this thing actually became what it is. Maybe they summons it. Maybe some kind of black magic. You never know. I'm just saying these are theories. I'm not saying I know everything. I'm just saying this might be a theory.
Yeah, it's interesting to me because there are creatures that come into being because of people believing in them. And that's really kind of cool here. But what I think, either we're dealing with a demon that is hunting down people that are pretending to be it through, I don't know, maybe some sort of ego thing, or maybe that's just kind of built into the mythology of it. Or you have a creature here that is cyclical, that comes in cycles, to where every so many years it shows up. But to me, if it was something like that, it wouldn't really fit the pattern of showing up when people are pretending to be it. Because that would just be one hell of a big coincidence that people just happen to pretend to be this creature at the exact same time when it's supposed to show up again. And there would be a set number of years in between these events, and it would be a regular span of time. So if it was 40 years, it would be 40 years, and then the next 40 years it would happen again, and then another 40 years would happen again, etc., all the way up till today. And we don't see that really here. What you have is gaps. Yes, definitely we have gaps, but they're not any standard amount of time in between the gaps. It differs. So I think what we're dealing with is something that is either drawn by belief in it, by people thinking about it and believing in it, such as Slenderman is. And if that's the case, then that makes a lot of sense. If somebody is pretending to be this creature, all of a sudden a lot of people start believing in it again and talking about it. It gets all this press and everybody's thinking about this creature, and that brings it back. It charges it up and gives it the power to exist on our plane again, so to speak. Maybe it's something that dwells in another dimension, and that's how it gets the power to cross over onto our plane and do damage or whatever. Or maybe it's some sort of demonic entity that just comes out because people are talking about it. And, it's offended that somebody's pretending to be it. I don't know. I don't know the answer to this one, but it's very, very interesting. And I think we figured out some kind of cool stuff this time that I don't know if anybody's ever really put that together before like that. I never thought of it that way because I didn't really think that all of these different occurrences were connected. I didn't think it was the same creature because there are subtle differences in each one. It doesn't fit the exact same pattern. But there is enough similarities that it's possible that it could be the same creature. So we might do another show sometime in the future when we've looked into this a little bit more as far as the progression of the violence, the progression of the supernatural abilities, all those little bitty details that can really form a true pattern and tell us what's going on here. We might do this again at some point when we have more answers for you. But I think this was a very good start, and I think that we're on the right track on this one. I think we figured something out here. So we are almost out of time. So I'm going to throw over to Old Boy. He's got a few things to say, and then he's going to go ahead and give his shout-outs.
Yeah, actually, I'm really glad we did the show because originally I didn't really know too much about this, and I'm actually found out a lot about it. So I'm kind of it's really interesting to me. I want to say that Art Bell died on Friday the 13th. You guys, if you're in paranormal, you know who he is. On KFI, he used to be on Coast to Coast. Ended up doing his own, retiring, then coming back doing his own little thing on Sirius. The guy, that's the reason I got into this. I used to listen to him in a car when I would be at work. I would listen to his shows all the time. Him and George Knipp. And now George Norrie does Coast to Coast. You guys all know who he is, especially you're in paranormal. You know who Art Bell is, and he passed away on Friday the 13th. And I just wanted to say thank you, Art Bell, for all the great times you gave me when I was at work in the middle of the night listening to all these stories of shadow people and alien abductions and, the Illuminati and demons and werewolves. But thank you. And to the bottom of my heart, I pray for your family, your kid, your wife. I hope they get through this the best they can do. That's all I can say on that. And I want to thank everybody for listening to our show. We're almost at 2,500 subscribers on YouTube. You guys want to listen to our old shows or newer shows, remember subscribe on James Hershey Jr.'s page on YouTube. Follow us on Facebook, me or James Hershey, James Ash, Old Boy. Follow me on Facebook. Actually, I'm almost to 5,000 friends, so I might have to make another profile, and I'm probably going to do it. I'm going to make an Old Boy profile next. So that, and if you want to sponsor or do advertising, let us know. We have a thing you can get a hold of us, me or James Hershey, and we have pricing. We can tell you what and we also have a merchandise store. He'll tell you the site in a minute. You can buy shirts of Staring the Abyss, me, James Hershey, or his books, or there's different pictures of Staring the Abyss and Old Boy shirts and James Hershey shirts. So we just have a whole bunch of stuff. So you guys check it out if you want. Just remember to always live your life to the fullest. You only live once. And remember, have a good night, Misfits, Sugar Ladies, and Demon Hunters. I love you, and thank you. Blessed be.
Art Bell was not only an amazing talent, he was really a groundbreaking revolutionary in a way. Because I remember when I first heard Art Bell on the radio, I had been interested in the paranormal and all these creatures since I was a very small child. Some of the first books I ever read were mythology books. I've been into this stuff my entire life. But I remember first hearing Art Bell on the radio when I was younger and thinking, wow, nobody is doing this. It blew me away that was somebody's job to sit there and talk about these things that I love so much. And that's how he made his living. And to me, that was an amazing thing. Now, I never at that time, or really until I started doing radio, I never imagined that I would be here, that I would be doing this as well. I had no clue. I always wanted to be a writer, and I always wanted to be a musician. Those were the two things I wanted to do with my life. And I've done both. I played music for many, many years. I was signed. I was on the radio. I had a career. And then once I retired from music, because I wanted to get married and have a family, and those two things don't coincide very well. So I retired, and I thought, you know what, I'm gonna write. I'm gonna do my other childhood dream, because I've already accomplished one. I'm gonna accomplish the other. So I began writing, and I started doing that for a living. And now that's how I make my living, is through writing horror novels and selling them. I never imagined that I would be doing this. The way I got into radio really was through doing press for my books. You know, I would get booked to do all these different shows, radio shows, print interviews, TV shows, stuff like that. But by doing the radio shows and just telling my story and talking about my books, you know, getting interviewed, everybody kept telling me that I was good at this, that I had a great voice, and that I was a really good guest, and that I ought to do radio. And it just kind of fell into my lap. Somebody just offered me a show one day and said, hey, man, you want to be on the show as a permanent guy? And I'm like, yeah, sure. And that's how this journey began for me in radio. Now, we were doing a little bit different kind of stuff back in the old days when I first started doing this. And then when I got with Old Boy, we decided fairly quickly that we wanted to do this. We wanted to do a paranormal show talking about the stuff that we talk about every week. And eventually we got there, and that's how Staring Into the Abyss was born. But I never dreamed that I would be the guy that is on the radio talking to the entire world right now about werewolves and vampires and Rougarous and Wendigos and all these wonderful, wonderful things. Never thought it would be me. But I'm honored, and I'm blessed that it is. So I want to also say a huge thank you to Art Bell and his memory, because he really made me see that you could do this. Because what we do is not easy. Not only is there a ton of research involved and all that kind of stuff, but you have got to have a massive amount of courage to do what we do. To talk about the kind of creatures and the kind of things that we talk about. Not only are you opening yourself up to attack from any of these kind of entities that we talk about, you're opening yourself up to all kinds of dark and evil things by talking about demons and by doing all these things that we do. So there's that side of it that you have to be very, very careful and know what you're doing. But also you're opening yourself up to ridicule and just all these trolls on the internet that love nothing more than to insult you and call you crazy and stupid and all this kind of stuff. You've got to have really thick skin, and you've got to have a lot of courage to be able to put yourself out there like that and say, you know what, I don't care if everybody else says that it's silly. I want to know if this thing exists, and I'm actually going to do the work, and I'm going to find out. Because, see, that's the thing, is the majority of these people that say these horrible things on the internet and make fun of you for believing in the paranormal, They haven't done the research like we've done the research. They don't have the experience. They don't have the knowledge that we have. They don't have the knowledge that you have, the people that are listening to me right now. Because a lot of you out there listening have a great deal of interest and a great deal of love for some of these creatures and for the paranormal in general. And you have a lot of knowledge as well. And it always seemed funny to me that the people that make fun of you, they don't actually know what they're talking about half the time. They haven't done the research. They haven't spent the hours in the library looking at this stuff like we have. They haven't spent the years in the field actually doing the research. I can imagine when Art Bell started doing this, it was even worse. Because now paranormal is a really popular thing. But back then, all you really had was Art Bell. You had Leonard Nimoy doing In Search Of, that kind of stuff. But there wasn't much. There wasn't ghost shows on every channel. Everybody didn't want to be a paranormal investigator. You didn't have a Ouija board game that you could play with. None of that stuff was around. So I think we should dedicate this show, old boy, to the memory of Art Bell. Because on this show, we kind of did what he used to do, which is we talked about a subject, we learned some new things about a subject, and we came up with some new ideas about a subject through the discussion, which I think is a valuable thing, and I think it moves the paranormal field forward. So, to Art Bell and his family, much love. We appreciate everything you ever did. You knocked down the doors so that we could walk through them fairly easily, and I greatly appreciate that. The website for the YouTube channel is youtube.com/James Hershey Jr. The merchandise store is teespring.com. That's TEESPRING.com/store/staring into the abyss. On that site, there's just tons and tons and tons of merchandise. I'm not going to get into all of it, but trust me, if you want to find it, it's there. There's so much stuff, from posters to cell phone cases to all kinds of different clothing. All that stuff is there. So if you're looking for merch for Staring Into the Abyss, there's your spot. Go check it out and shop to your heart's content. It's a wonderful, wonderful thing. The prices are good. The quality is good. Everything's great. So thank you guys so much for listening. Thank you for all of your support and all of your love. We are honored to do what we do for a living. We are honored to come into your cars or your living rooms or wherever you listen to us every week and speak to you about these things that we love so very, very much. And I just want you to know from the bottom of my heart that I love each and every one of you, and I appreciate you, and I'm very grateful and thankful that you want to invite me in to your life every week. I don't take that for granted. That means a lot to me. So thank you. I love you very much. And until we speak to you again, love many, trust few, and do harm to none. God loves you, and so do we. Bye-bye.